It is over.
Hey everybody, and welcome to another Insiders interview. And today we have the privilege of having on our show Dr. Robert Stinson. Robert, how are you today? And thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm a big Insiders fan, and like I was saying before we went live, you guys are NWA family. I know you cover more than you're broader in your perspective, and you cover all of pro wrestling. But we appreciate your sympathies and your appreciation for what's going on with the NWA and your admiration for Nick Aldis and all the important things going on right now. But it's my pleasure to be here. I'm doing well, much better than I deserve, and I'm very pleased to spend some time with you this evening.
Awesome. Well, we're thrilled to have you. So I guess we'll dig right into that. I know you're kind of a super fan. I've heard some stories about how I think I was talking to Elder Sauer, and I think he mentioned about how you and your kids all dressed up in the question mark gear. You gotta tell us about that one.
Well, first of all, that was a shoot. That wasn't dressing up. We studied the arts of the secret arts of Mongrovian.
You're in Monrovia. There you go.
There you go.
Well, I'm not Mongrovian. I know Wrestling Days is Mongrovian. We were Kingdomite missionaries to Monrovia for a while, and we are related to Wrestling Days by marriage. But my daughter likes to brag to her friends that she's broken the Mongrovian oak, and she's legitimately earned her 4th degree. I'm still a humble 3rd degree black belt holder, but no, it's one of those things where certain things. For me, wrestling. One thing I like about the NWA is it's always been content, even since back in the late 70s, early 80s when I first started getting aware of it. It was something that was digestible for the whole family. And it's important to me that my daughters and my son, I have 3 daughters and a son, that we can all enjoy this product. And a lot of what I gauge is like what's going to be over or not. I gauged from my daughter Piper's perspective, and she really latched on to question mark and liked it, just like a lot of people in the fan there at the tapings. You saw it on, I'm sure, on Power, how they just took to it. And she loves Aaron Stevens. She loves his kind of snarky humor and that kind of thing. And so before we went to the what turned out to be the last tape, she's like, "Hey man, let's show off our 4th degree black belts." And so we went and got karate gis and did it up and went into the show and kind of next thing you know, we were tweeted all over the place, and it was a lot of fun.
That's awesome, man. Shout out to your daughter. I watched some of the videos that she did. The one with Days was hilarious, where she was playing the music for him, and he like absolutely, he just you could tell that Days wasn't a metal fan. Right. So yeah, that was. I think you played Rob Zombie, I think, on that, didn't you?
Right. We're big Rob Zombie fans in our house. We like all kinds of music, and we have. Since my military days, I've sort of gravitated towards metal. My daughters were preachers, especially really my youngest, my 18-month-old. She really likes metal more than anything. My Piper herself is more into theater and Broadway type stuff, show tunes. But Wrestling Days was actually our first guest on the show. We'd done a couple of Piper's Notes episodes prior to that, but he was our first kind of video watch-along guest. And we thought, if we want to go in this direction, let's start out with a bang. And of course, Wrestling Days is so gracious and just an infectious personality. And I tweeted him. He tweeted back within like 20 minutes. It's like, "I'd love to do it," and the rest is history.
That's awesome. That's awesome, man. Yeah, no, I loved it. I thought it was great. I just loved watching his face when he heard it, and when he's sitting there listening to it. It was great. It was a great episode. Well, first of all, I've got to thank you for your service, obviously with the being with the military. Let's backtrack a little bit. So when did you first, I know you had said you wanted to pass it on along to your daughters and things like that, which is very cool. We hear a lot of people talking to us about that, how, they came up with either a grandparent, a father, or a parent watching this and kind of getting them into it. So what got you started into wrestling, years ago when you first started watching?
I grew up I'm a military brat. My dad was in the military, but I'm from Dalton, Georgia originally, which is extreme northwest Georgia. And this is the heart of, Braves country, TBS. And we were also very poor growing up. Don't get me wrong. I'm not going to tell you a sob story. My brother and I had we were very happy as kids, but we had absentee parents for one reason or another. And the thing that we kind of relied on, and it sort of raised us, because in the absence of any parental discipline, you know, we knew we had to be in on Saturday night at 6:05. We weren't out running around raising hell and all that kind of stuff. You know, we were in at 6:05 to watch Saturday Night Wrestling with Crockett Promotions, and then the Braves would come on after that. So we since I can remember, really, I don't remember a time in my life when I wasn't an avid NWA fan. And I remember when we had money, which wasn't very often, but when we did, I would rush over. We lived very close to a food line. We would walk down there, and I would dump all my money on the wrestling magazines and come back. And that was kind of my childhood until about 13 or 14 years old. And so I have the NWA has always been in my life. I mean, I remember my earliest memories are of Lance Russell and Gordon Soley and Tommy Rich, Buzz Sawyer, Dusty Rhodes, Harley. Even before Ric Flair had emerged as the sort of the mainstay of the NWA, back when Harley was still kind of the guy, that's when I was sort of cutting my teeth on it. And I just remember that was such a powerful, wholesome, good presence in my life. And I, you know, and it's biased. My daughters all my kids are great. Piper is such a sweet. She's my middle child that you see on Piper's notes. She takes onto my interest. She takes hold of them. And a lot of times it's not even because she's particularly interested. It's just because she knows that I like it. And so she wants to find these avenues to spend time with me. And I feel like she's doing a lot of parenting for me too, you know, because she indulges me, and she has really taken it. She's become a big baseball fan. She's a huge Braves fan. And she absolutely loves the NWA. And that ritual, that Tuesday night power ritual, became a true ritual in our house, where we would watch, you know, some of the pre-show stuff with Jay Cal out of Alliance podcast, and then we'd go and watch Power, and then we'd watch Gary Horn, and then later Gary Horn and Adam Rotella do their thing afterwards, and we were sucked in that way. But it's just one of those things where it was always an important, very positive thing in my life, and I wanted my kids to enjoy it. It's kind of like those things, like baseball players when I was a kid seemed so big. Now that I'm bigger, they don't seem quite as big, but I know to my daughters they do. So I want them to experience that magic as well, I guess.
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. Yeah, you know, it's great how, you know, you bring that stuff up, and again, you tradition and, you know, being able to pass that on to your kids as well is awesome. So you got started pretty young. That was around the same age I think I started watching, probably when I was around, maybe around 9 or 10, late 70s, early 80s. Now up in the North, obviously we didn't get a lot of it. That was back when cable was just 13, 14 channels. And it was, I didn't get to see as much NWA. Now I know Jeff has a big background in it, probably way more than I do, Jeff. So I know you can probably relate to that a little bit better than I could.
Oh, yeah. I grew up on NWA and Jim Crockett Promotions, and seeing all those guys around here in South Carolina. And, you know, back in the days when they would actually go to small high school gyms and wrestle. So, yeah, I'm right there. I'm right there with you, man. It's that's where I really cut my teeth on things in wrestling. And let me ask you this: what was a match or a series of matches in those early days that stand out to you and really drew you in?
There are a bunch. So the earliest memories where I was like first getting really like passionately into it was with Tommy Rich and Buzz Sawyer. They had and Jeff, you'll remember this. They had an epic feud in Georgia. Tommy Rich at one point was the biggest star in the Southeast, bar none. I mean, he was over like Rover. I mean, this guy would go in, and he was a good-looking guy, very talented. Had that bleach blonde hair. And Buzz Sawyer, I remember being afraid of Buzz Sawyer as a kid. But that match, and you guys know this, that match culminated in a very historic night in Atlanta, the last Battle of Atlanta. But we lived through that. I mean, when they would tour and do little house shows like in Murray County, Georgia, or around here, we would see them. And I just remember like running away from Buzz Sawyer and like going to my dad. When my dad wasn't in the picture very often, but when he was, you know, he would take us down to the local Coliseum to see that kind of stuff. But that was the first one that I was really aware of, where like I was passionately involved, because this is way before the days of extreme wrestling, but Buzz Sawyer in those days was extreme. And that last battle of Atlanta, it was gruesome. But also, every now and again, the Freebirds would come through. They're known for a lot of feuds. Have been mostly known for the Von Erichs, for the lay fans, and we saw some of that too. But my dad was a very big mark for Michael Hayes and Terry Gordy. Terry Gordy actually is an alumni of the high school that I am an administrator at. And then, of course, you had later on, when I'm starting to approach my teenage years, Magnum and Nikita Koloff, the best of seven. Oh, yeah. That feud, I think I really felt that. This is at the height of the Cold War. People can't really understand how big a deal that was today, because they weren't a lot, they don't remember the Cold War, these kids don't, and how we used to do drills in our school and we were afraid that nuclear holocaust might actually happen, and we were afraid of the Soviets and this and that. And you have Nikita Koloff, who we absolutely believe, and he's another one that I was afraid of. But Magnum TA representing the United States against the Russians, I mean, that was just amazing stuff. But there's so many things. I mean, you could point to Rock and Roll and Midnight Express, of course, Tully and Magnum, the early feud with Flair and Harley, where Harley put the bounty on Ric Flair's head. And we see a lot of that today. That's almost become sort of cliche. But in 1979 through 1983, that was really, really groundbreaking stuff. It was innovative and it very believable.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you bring up some great stuff, and I know we had Nikita on our podcast, and we talked to him about some of those early days, and that was fun to kind of relive some of those times with him when he was on. If you could just talk to me a little bit about the emergence of Ric Flair in the NWA, and what you thought about him from the beginning to his rise to where he got to in NWA.
When I was getting aware of wrestling, Ric Flair was already a big name, and I think we all expected him to move into main event capacity, and he already really was. I mean, he'd held titles that were important then that a lot of fans today that are just getting into it aren't aware of, like the Mid-Atlantic title. The Mid-Atlantic title in those days was considered the Crockett Cup stepping stone to either the U.S. title or the World's title. And Ric Flair had held that. He'd held a TV title. He had some really important feuds with Roddy Piper and some other, Greg Valentine and some other guys over those really prestigious belts in those days. So when I was first getting aware of Tommy Rich and Buzz Sawyer, we knew of Ric Flair. And he was such a good talker. He always was. That's just something that you don't really – I suppose that today with wrestling schools and clinics, people do study how to talk. But for him, it was so natural and cohesive. And even today when you see him do his stuff and his little gimmicks that he does to as a WWE ambassador or whatever, he's just such a natural, charismatic guy. You can't watch Flair and not just want to go join the army, or go conquer the world. And so he was already a big deal. Now, most kids, I think, naturally are inclined to like the baby faces. And when before Ric Flair became the biggest heel of all time in the NWA, he was a really huge baby face. Mm-hmm. And so there was a lot of time when my brother would force me to wrestle him, and he'd always want to be the baby, and he'd make me be the heel. And so there was a time from about 80 to 82 to 83 where he was portraying Ric Flair in our matches, and he was making me be Harley or somebody like that, one of the Funks or something like that. And then about 84, 85, when Flair sort of decisively made a heel turn, even though he was still over with a lot of fans and continued to be for many years, that changed in my household. And my brother was he was Dusty and Ronnie. He would force me to be Ric Flair. And so as early as 86, 87, I kind of identified with Ric Flair. And from that point on, I was a huge Ric Flair mark, man. I was he's been my favorite since, even though it didn't start out that way. But I remember during 86, for me, the greatest match of all time is the Dusty Flair Great American Bash 1986 match in the steel cage.
Yeah.
That's an epic match. And I don't know how Meltzer would rate it on his scale. I'm sure it's going to break pretty high. But I remember, and you'll remember this, Jeff, we did not find out how those played out until usually 2 to 3 weeks later. But every now and again, because a title change in those days was so big a deal, they didn't happen every 2 weeks like they do now, it would make the newspaper. And so like 2 weeks before we would find out on TBS what had happened, I was like betting I was like, I got the scoop. I know Ric Flair won. He was on that defending the NWA belt, I think 16 times in 30 days or something like that on that Bash tour. And I was firmly convinced that Ric Flair was going to run that whole tour and retain the title because he just never lost. I remember he cut a promo one time with Dusty. He's like, Dusty, when I walk around here week after week and say I can't be beat, I'm lying because I've been beaten once in the last 10 years. I mean, it was amazing. And so I told my brother, it's like, look, I bet you anything. I'm going to tell you, I already heard. Someone told me, I got the scoop. Ric Flair beat Dusty. And sure enough, 2 weeks later, here on WCW or NWA Saturday Night, they show the clip of Dusty winning the cage, belt in the cage, and that was just like a decisive moment because I was so like heartbroken over that. Like I was in tears, and I lost, I think, some Matchbox cards and a couple other things that I bet my brother on. But Ric Flair, man, gosh, I mean, it's like, again, he's someone that I can't remember a time in my life when he wasn't a material, very important presence.
Right. Yeah. And since you mentioned a couple of his feuds, I've got to bring up a couple more. Obviously, we've got to mention the feud with Ricky the Dragon Steamboat. What did you think about that feud?
Ric Flair routinely cites Ricky Steamboat as his greatest opponent, and he will tell you that they're, you know, if you've seen any of the extensive shoot interview material that they have out there with Flair, he will talk about how, look, what we did in that series of matches there in 87, 88, 89. He's like, we were doing that every day in the late 70s, early 80s. I mean, it's a shame that so much of that stuff wasn't caught on, but I remember Ricky Steamboat. Now, we didn't get a lot of WWF material. We did on Sunday. We got it for like an hour time frame, and it was, you know, it was packaged stuff. But I knew of Ricky Steamboat, and I knew of Ricky Steamboat from early days in the NWA. With you know, he was a world tag team title holder at one point, and I remember that. I remember him being at Starrcade '83. So it was a big deal when he walked out of that curtain. He was revealed as the mystery partner, and he immediately like shot up as he was going to challenge Flair for the title. And I'm going to say, as much of a mark I was for Flair in those days, I knew Steamboat was going to win the title. I knew he was, and so it didn't surprise me when that happened in the way that it surprised me that Dusty won the belt. But that is probably. Although, because I'm getting a little older and there's a little bit less nostalgia for me, it's not my favorite Flair feud. But, you know, what I personally like is irrelevant. I think most people would look at that feud and say that was Flair's this is Flair at his peak, at his absolute best. And it's also, I think, Ricky Steamboat at his best too. And so, you know, if you want to rate the top Flair feuds of all time, just in terms of technical ability, storytelling, captivating the crowd, the Steamboat feud with Flair is tops, bar none.
Yeah. That was one of my first live events that I went to. I believe it was the very first one, as I saw those two in the Greensboro Coliseum.
Nice.
Yeah.
Man.
So that
do you
was,
have any of like the playbills or anything from that you were?
No. I had it. I saved it forever, and then when my mom passed away, we were like cleaning out stuff, and someone actually mistakenly threw it away. And yeah, I know, that was heartbreaking to lose that.
I'm collecting all of the NWA playbills now, just because I think that, and Jeff, you'll probably agree because you were aware of how it felt in the 80s with the studio stuff. I really feel like we're on the verge of something really, really important in wrestling history. Nick Aldis will reach the 600th day mark on June the 11th. That's only occurred in the history of wrestling since the foundations of the world, at least since we can trace a title back to 1905 with Frank Gotch and George Hackenschmidt and those guys. That's only happened, I think, 9 times, 10 times, something like that. And we're about to live that. Now I realize that the world is different and the title's not being defended per se in the NWA like it is in the AEW and the WWE. But we also have to remember that that's not an unusual thing in the NWA. The NWA has always been sort of a prize-fighting organization. It was not uncommon for Luthez to maybe defend a belt 2 or 3 times in a year. Earl Caddick, who's one of the earliest world championship title holders, held the belt, went off to serve in World War I, came back years later still holding the title but had not defended it. And so I don't think that we're really breaking a lot of precedent. The fact that Nick Aldis can carry the company and be the statesman that he is, I think it's really uniquely historic. And so when I go to the shows, I buy the playbills and keep them. I'm not going to make the mistake that I made before, packing them away and losing them.
Yeah. I wish I had kept it with me instead of leaving it here, because that would have been, so great to still have.
Great pieces of memorabilia for sure.
Yeah,
for sure. And that's a huge thing with Nick Aldis. We'll get into that in a bit because that's huge. So I guess fast forward to today, and what they started with this when they brought it back, and with the YouTube shows with Power. When you first heard about it, what did you think it was going to be, and when you first saw it, did it live up to the expectations that you had for it?
Well, I have been following the NWA kind of nonstop. I'm one of maybe 6 or 7 people out there, along with guys like Jason Cayley and all that really followed it through what they call the wilderness years. That's those years when WCW and NWA split, and NWA was kind of more or less a gimmick or treated as kind of a subordinate title. It lost its world title status with the PWI and that kind of thing. But I followed that all through NWA TNA. I followed Impact when Billy Corgan was active there. I followed 10 Pounds of Gold. So knowing that Billy Corgan grew up on studio wrestling, I had an idea that when he started announcing that this project was coming, that it would very much resemble what somebody like Jeff and I would have experienced in the 80s. And it absolutely lived up to the hype. I'm telling you, I mean, I was privileged to go to one studio taping when I was a kid in the old Turner studio, and going to we did not go to all the tapings just because I'm an educator and I can't always be there, and a lot of times they're recording Saturday, Sunday, and Monday and that kind of thing. But we did go to the last one that they went and saw the last 3 episodes, the NWA Super Power, and then the 2 Power episodes prior to that, and a couple of episodes of Circle Square. And it just sent chills up my spine. It was like I felt like I was being transported in time. And there's something really unique about the studio atmosphere that only the NWA gives you. You can't replicate that in empty arena settings. You can't obviously replicate that in arenas. It's very unique, the amount of intimacy that's there, the responsiveness that the talent has with the fans. It's almost like there's a reason why the NWA fan base is so hardcore and so devoted. And so, and you look at with COVID-19 and the quarantine and shutdowns, not only do you have a lot of talent stepping up to produce content, you have the fans producing content of anywhere from guys like Elder Sauer and Adam Rotella to Jason Cayley to the NWA Kid to Gary Horn and myself and Hey, it's Will. This is the NWA podcast. You guys are producing content like Mad Men. Wrestling Days is doing great stuff. I mean, the fan base is so – it's like there's a reciprocal understanding that no matter what happens in the world, we're going to make sure this survives, and not only survives but prospers. And so to your question, I was absolutely not only like spooked, but I was like haunted and amazed all at once. And I'm not trying to be like over the top melodramatic. It really like it spooked me to walk in there because like, oh my gosh, is this 1986? Am I in the Turner studio? It was so surreal. But I hope that answers the question.
Yes, yeah, no, yeah, I love it. I love it too. Days kind of introduced me to it. I heard about it, and I kind of knew, like you were saying. I mean, I always knew about Billy Corgan from Smashing Pumpkins and everything like that too. But I kind of followed the news as well. I hadn't seen it, and then Days had started watching it. So shout out to him because I hadn't known when it started or where it was. So I got to watching it as well, and I had the same feeling you did. I mean, I didn't grow up with NWA, but we had studio wrestling up here too. I got that same feeling, and I love the atmosphere. I love the closeness of it. And yes, when you do that kind of stuff in studio, the fans are absolutely a part of the show. And I know Adam Rotella has mentioned that on our show a few times. And that's exactly why it's tough right now for them to continue, because the fans are so big a part of that. And it's exciting. It really is. It's exciting to see. And again, when I started watching it, I got hooked right away. And I think I came in watching the show that really wasn't a show. It was the episode with Thunder Rosa and the MMA stuff. I didn't actually even watch an actual show, but I loved it. And everybody we've talked to from there, to the superstars, to people around it and everything like that, all say the same thing, that it's an absolute experience. Talk a little bit more about that. So the intimacy of it all. And I mean, I know you said you were at some of the tapings and everything like that. You mentioned that, you felt like you were transported back. I mean, I guess I'll ask you this. What's the interaction like between the wrestlers and the fans? Because I know Adam mentioned that, Gary Horn mentioned that he gets yelled at all the time by Nick Aldis, which I think is hilarious. How was that? Like, how cool was that to see?
Oh, it's cool. And not only, I mean, there's a couple of different levels of that. One is proximity. Like, you have a situation where the talent emerges from the curtain, or they've come down the staircase, and we always strategically pick a seat right by the stairs, and so you walk by, Melina walks by, so we can smell her perfume, and there's some physical contact, some mild contact. Jax Dane and Tim Storm, just got into an all-out brawl right in front of, 3 feet away from my 18-month daughter. She was just bawling in tears, just completely afraid, and I was just laughing like crazy. But so there's the proximity, one. But two, in a studio environment, you only got a couple of hundred people there, and you can kind of hear on Power, you can hear like the comments that people made a couple times. If you listen to the last 3 episodes, you'll even hear Piper shout some things out, and inevitably they respond to it. They'll banter back and forth with you. They've got to cut this down, to do a taping, which typically is about, what we see on Power comes out to be about 45 minutes to an hour. It takes a good 2 hours to do that. And so you've got a lot of stuff that's shaved out. There'll be instances where the crowd gets kind of really raucous, or they might start chanting something that might not be appropriate. We'll get corrected on that. And there'll be instances where the talent might come out. There was a moment where James Storm came out, but just kind of bickering with the crowd, and that stuff. Obviously, this is not with the cameras rolling. So there's that sort of just the engagement, the acknowledgement that, hey, we see you there and we appreciate you. And then you have to look at the way that even the fan presence influences the way that stories are the direction that stories and angles take in wrestling. For instance, the question mark that we referred to earlier. I speaking with like Danny Jordan. I did a show with Danny Jordan the other day on Piper's Notes, and we were talking about that, and she'll tell you, that the question mark thing was that was going to be a one-time thing, but it was so immediately over that it became its own thing, and now it's question mark is at least with the younger audience, is one of the most over personalities in the NWA, to the point that now it's a permanent thing. He's not going anywhere, so. And then I guess the fourth element would be that there is the meet and greet afterwards. You go to the tapings, go to the show, everybody goes in there, and afterwards you go up to they've got the merch tables up there in the studio, and most everybody is out there. Now, you're not going to see Billy Corgan out there. You're not going to see Nick Aldis typically, but you will see most everybody out there. You can see Billy Corgan if you buy, you purchase the VIP pass. you will go in before, an hour before everybody else, and Billy Corgan will kind of give you an orientation. He'll talk through the 20-year plan and that kind of thing. But even without that, if you just go and you're just, you just bought a ticket to go to the taping, you're going to be exposed to major league wrestling talent like you've never been exposed before, at a level of intimacy that you never imagined was possible. And it's really unique, because I've never been to an AEW show, but I've been to dozens and dozens of WWE shows. I've been to tons of Impact shows, TNA shows, independent shows, even little local independent, mom and pop programs that put on. You don't get that level of intimacy and acknowledgement and concern and respect for the fans like you do with the NWA.
Yeah, man, that's awesome. To go back to the question mark stuff, I love the character. And again, I grew up on that. I grew up on guys with masks. And it was just a thing. I can remember being infatuated with the masked superstar in WWF back in the early 80s. Even though he was a heel, I absolutely loved it. And that gimmick is fantastic. I think he's doing a tremendous job. Like you were saying, the fact that they are, that's one of the things I have to take my hat off to them for this. And the fact that their superstars really engage. And even on social media, they're very quick to put a like on a post. If someone, throws a post their way, they'll respond to posts and things like that, which I think is great. You don't see that a lot from other companies, whether, I don't know, maybe they're not encouraged to do it or not told to do it. But I think that's fantastic.
Yeah. And another thing too, is I think the NWA is very conscious about respecting the intelligence of the fan, and hopefully we'll get into pro wrestling being high culture here at some point in this discussion. But you're not going to see what you get in the NWA is, obviously there's a lot of storytelling going on, but they're not going to ask you to suspend credulity. You know what I mean? You're not going to see people dematerializing, and you're not going to see people just hating for hate's sake. Nobody really does that. You're going to see very credible things. And this actually came up in our live stream last night with Gary and Will about someone posed a question. Well, Stinson, you're always talking about how you don't like these otherworldly gimmicks. What about Monrovia? And I was like, well, that's not unbelievable though. Monrovia is an analogy for parts unknown. It's nothing that we've not heard before, and it's a common, that is a staple of wrestling culture, like you said. The masked wrestler from parts unknown is as essential to wrestling as the belt is, and there have been, in fact, in more times than not, it's been those kinds of mystery gimmicks that have carried the promotions along more than the belts have. And I'm thinking about the AWA in particular, because there was a long time there in the mid to late 80s where the AWA belt lost all credibility, but you still had a lot of vibrant storytelling going on. And a lot of that has to do with these kind of mystery gimmicks with masked competitors or competitors from parts unknown and that kind of thing, So to me, it's no contradiction at all to say, look, I don't want to suspend credulity, but I can still stomach the question mark, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I absolutely totally agree. Jeff, go ahead, man. I don't want to hog the whole thing here. Go.
No, it's fine. I just wanted to ask. I mean, you brought it up a little bit, but how do you think professional wrestling as a whole has evolved? And to your point, I think a long time ago, it was kind of like, I don't want to say insulting the intelligence, but in some ways it was. But how do you think the business has evolved in terms of storylines and the realistic nature of some of them?
Well, we all know that the internet changed everything. It changed the nature of kayfabe and all that. I guess I kind of like to say that human nature has never really changed in 10,000 years, and so the themes that really draw us in as humans are the same. So, just for example, you can go back to 1982 and 83, and you can see the same spectrum of entertainment that you're going to see today. You can see Kevin Sullivan and the Purple Haze and the Fallen Angel doing really scandalous, unbelievable things down in Florida. And then you could see, you know, your much more believable stuff going on here in Crockett Promotions and in the Mid-Atlantic and that kind of thing. And then you see, you know, cartoonish stuff going on, and that's no insult. I think there's a place for all. The world is plenty big for all that. But you saw the more cartoon characters, the merchandising up in the Northeast with the WWF. I don't think that has necessarily changed except to a matter of degree. So when we get to today, because of technology and the internet, obviously, kayfabe is something that we like to, you know, there is an element of suspension of belief, but also when you get to the NWA, I think that the NWA still presents itself and still conducts itself as a spectator sport and not wrestling entertainment. And what I mean by that is I think that when you see, for instance, Nick Aldis and Marty Scurll, or Nick Aldis and Tim Storm, I think that the competition there is legitimate. I think that they're really trying to stage a prize fight and bring out the most in each other, the best in each other. There's still a competitive bent there and a competitive orientation. It's like you're watching Rocky versus Apollo Creed. Whereas in other promotions, you're seeing like I just think back a few weeks ago to AEW, and don't get me wrong, I like AEW. I think it's a first cousin to the NWA. But there was this scene where where Broken Matt Hardy is out there. I think he's Damascus, and he's like physically before our eyes dematerializing and appearing at different points in the stadium. And I was like, come on, guys, let's not. That's like not believable. And I think later on in social media, they tried to clean that up and said, well, it was the drone that was doing that. He wasn't really doing that. But I guess to bring it back, there's always been elements to push believability. And we see the same sort of spectrum today, just more so. You know what I mean? The envelope is pushed a little more. The Attitude Era had a lot to do with that. I'm not a big fan of that era simply because, and I was at the time, but now in my wisdom and age, I suppose, and fatherhood, you know, I think that wrestling, you know, I can go anywhere for gore or smut. I don't have to find it in wrestling. Wrestling should be something that my whole family can digest and appreciate as a form of high culture and legitimate literature and philosophy and mythology. It should be something that we can all appreciate. But you've always had people pushing the envelope. You've always had people pushing the bounds of credibility, and that is the case today too, but more so, just because of our ability to advance that with you know, photography and cinema and just sheer technology, I suppose.
So do you think, I guess kind of since we mentioned AEW, do you think there's a scenario where the NWA ends up working with another promotion, kind of a cross promotion? I know they are a little bit with Ring of Honor, but do you think there's a possibility down the road of AEW or someone else?
I do. I think I know that there's a little bit of personal sour taste in Billy's mouth for Impact just because of his experience there. So I that might be a little harder sell, though. That wouldn't shock me. There is a common ancestry between AEW and NWA, and I've always kind of felt that Cody Nick Aldis 3 is inevitable. There's a kinship, and even with WWE, we know that Triple H is a huge NWA fan. He's a huge fan.
Right.
He respects Nick Aldis. He has the original 10 pounds of gold in his office. That's how much he respects it. I think Billy Corgan and David Lagana would be open to anything. So it's not really on their end. They've shown their willingness to do cross-promotional stuff, not only with Ring of Honor, but also during the Aldis Crusade, where he toured for 60 days and went to 4 continents and defended the belt in other countries and in other promotions. The NWA is certainly more than able to do that and more than willing. And it would not surprise me to see some cross-promotional. Now, with the nature of the world and travel being what it was, the New Japan stuff might be a little harder, although all things being equal and normalcy returning, that wouldn't surprise me either. But I could see the AEW and NWA doing something just because there was a common kinship there and a mutual respect. I mean, you look at the roster today, from Colt Cabana to Penelope Ford to the Bunny to Sammy Guevara to Cody. Obviously, these are all men, to Archer. These are all men that have history either with the NWA or with Nick Aldis. And so this is just a matter of people putting their heads together and agreeing to do something to benefit and elevate the sport of professional wrestling as a whole. But it wouldn't surprise me. Now, that's not any kind of inside information. I'm not in the know. Gary Horn talks to David Lagana. I don't have that kind of relationship with him. But I would suspect that in a year or two, you might see something like that. It wouldn't surprise me.
Do you think that a TV deal is needed for NWA to achieve something like that, or do you think them staying on YouTube would be just as good for them to kind of achieve something like that?
Obviously, a TV deal is great for the exposure it gives you, the amount of living rooms it brings you into. I think that we have to remember that for Billy Corgan or William Patrick Corgan and for David Lagana, the NWA is not a money-making endeavor for them. Obviously, they don't want to lose money on it, but this is a passion project for them. They do it because they love wrestling, and they have been quite successful. Now, I would say 5 to 10 years ago, a TV deal would have been absolutely critical, but today I don't think so. I think your younger audience is very savvy to social media and to platforms like YouTube. We hit 200,000 subscribers, which for a small promotion like the NWA is, that's pretty amazing. Not to mention the subscribers and the views that you're getting on the talent-based content or the NW-supported fan-driven content, like This Is the NWA or 10 Pounds of Podcast or Insiders, that kind of thing, which I associate with the NWA. I know you guys have a broader audience, but I consider you guys part of the NWA promotional package, So I don't think it's absolutely critical. I don't think that it's necessary. Could it happen and would it benefit the brand? I certainly don't think it would hurt it. And nobody's going to shy away from trying to bring the product into more audiences. But I think that it's very important for Billy that the buck stops with him. And I think doing the YouTube thing ensures that it does. Whereas when you're going into TV deals, there's a lot of other accountability in place. And it's not necessary to achieve what he's trying to achieve and to do successfully. So I would say I would be more surprised to see a TV deal come out than a cross-promotional arrangement be worked out.
That's a big question. I know we've talked about that before, whether or not that, we kind of felt that they had to go that direction in order to compete. But look, it's such a different thing. And so, it's kind of its own thing that, I don't know that it necessarily has to go that route. Because, look, the fans are already out there. The people really love this stuff. I would tend to agree with you. I don't know that they have to go that direction. But obviously, like you said, it would be great if that did happen at some point in time.
You have to see too that I think that the AEW, Impact, Ring of Honor, NWA, WWE, they all have their audiences that they're appealing to. And one of the things that if you listen to some of the many Aldis interviews out there, it inevitably comes up that one of the priorities of the NWA was to make it an organization about, one, being a spectator sport. It wasn't going to be a cartoon. It wasn't going to be a carnival. Not that Carneyland's not, but it was not going to suspend reality per se. It was going to be a spectator sport built around the concept of the prize fight. And it's really going to be hard to do that with a TV deal week after week without starting to dabble in some of the things that you see the AEW and WWE that are almost required to do to maintain audience interest, especially with younger audiences. So not only is it not necessary, it almost be kind of contradictory or contrary to kind of the mission of what William Patrick Corgan and Lagana are trying to achieve with resurrecting and bringing the NWA back to national prominence, but as a spectator sport along the lines of other prize fighting organizations like the MMA or boxing promotions.
Yeah. That's a very good point. So you mentioned Carneyland, and I know when this came on, I was laughing with Adam. We were talking a little bit about it this past week on our show, and it again. I'm an older dude myself, so it brought me back to like some of the sketch comedy. And I had told them, I'm like, I remember things like Rowan and Martin's Laughing back in the day, and that's kind of what maybe a little bit of Saturday Night Live thrown in there and everything. But what did you think of that when you first saw it? I know it was a big mystery as to what it was. So what are your thoughts on that? I mean, I have to say, I think it is allowing the athletes to kind of showcase some things that maybe they wouldn't have been allowed to showcase if it was just a regular wrestling show. So what did you think of Carneyland, and what do you think of it going forward?
I liked it. I'm not going to say I liked everything about it, but I did. Overall, I liked it for what you just said, that this is a chance for wrestlers to showcase. Corrigan has always said that the NWA was going to try to be the adult in the room, and so empty stadium wrestling is just not going to be our thing because we rely on the audience and that kind of thing. So allowing wrestlers to produce packaged content and sketches that allow us to peek a little bit behind the curtains, that show their personalities and tell some really crazy stories about the life that is wrestling, I think is very intriguing. Right now I'm reading a fantastic book by Brian Solomon. I've actually read it 4 or 5 times, so it's not like it's new to me, but it's one of those books that I've got a couple of copies, and the one that I kind of keep handy, I highlight and write. It's called Pro Wrestling FAQ. I highly recommend it. But one of the things that strikes me is that in those early chapters, we see how prominent, like the carnival life, the roving from town to town, the curiosity, the quirkiness of wrestling was back in those early golden days. And like we were saying earlier about human nature not changing, that really hasn't changed. It's still very much a very curious life choice and a pursuit. And so getting to see this, the wrestlers pull the curtain back a little bit, I think it's just endearing. Again, I'm not high on every little part about it. There's one part in particular that really I've struggled with, but other than that, I've received it well. My kids like it. I'm not going to lie, I did have a little bit of insight before it went live just from some of our interactions with Mr. Lagana and with some of our stuff we've done with Sal Renaro and Zicky Dice and Nick Aldis, where they kind of told us, hey, look for this coming out on Carneyland. And now they didn't spoil anything or give away any secrets, but they told me enough to where I could kind of piece together the idea that this was going to be sort of sketch-oriented, sort of Saturday Night Live type stuff. And so we actually, before Carneyland aired, we were on a podcast with myself and Will and Gary and Lagana, and he was kind of asking us what we thought. And I think J. Cal was on there too. He was asking us what we thought. And I said, I think it's going to be sketch comedy or something like that. So yep. I was pleasantly surprised, and I like it. Again, not everything. I'm not one of those ones that just because it's NWA, I'm going to just drink it up. I'm going to be a critical fan too. I think I'm somewhat educated like you guys are, and I'm going to add my 2 cents. But I've really appreciated it, and overwhelmingly, it's a positive thing.
Yeah, I agree. And that's what Adam was asking us if I guess he must have been hearing from some people that they just thought it was a little bit too silly or whatever the case might be. But he asked Jeff and I our thoughts on that. And look, I mean, with everything going on, and the fact that it's so essential to have the fans in the stands for NWA, and the fact that they can get something out there that's, look, even for a half an hour or 40 minutes, it's going to take people away a little bit, entertain them, and just kind of make people forget about things for a little bit. That's kind of what wrestling's all about. So, I mean, I have to commend them for it. And again, some of them fit right in. You mentioned Zicky Dice. Boy, oh boy, I told Adam, I said I couldn't see a better thing for him to do on a show than that segment that he did. I could totally see him doing something like that, like back in the 1980s.
I was rolling. Zicky Dice. I love Zicky Dice, man.
Me too.
He had me roll. I was crackling up the whole time.
Yeah, me too. He's a great dude. We had him on our show, and his story it was fantastic. And I know Jeff and I saw that video that he had out from the site showing him working with the children and stuff like that, which was amazing to see. He was a great dude. Really liked it. I really love his character. I told him, I said, it's almost like it's a flashback character, which many of the people in NWA are. So absolutely, he's tremendous. So you mentioned the Nick Aldis thing, and I know you reached out to us, and we're honored to do that. This is, I don't think people realize maybe what a big moment it is. You touched on it a little bit, but obviously we've got that coming up, and talk a little bit more about it, and just that moment. It's great to see. He really does represent the NWA in a really good way. He's a presence out there, and now he's got the heelish thing going on with the crowd. I love the interaction he has, and he's interacted with fans as well. So I mean, the top guy in NWA, and you still see him coming in Days' chat and kind of saying hello. You still see him talking to people online and everything like that also. So talk a little bit about that coming up, because just so our fans and the community that's listening all realize what is happening with that.
Right. A world's champion is part sportsman, part head of state for a company. Always has been, when it's done well. And you look back into the organization that's always done best at doing that, that's the NWA. I think there were times when the AWA and the WWF did it very well too. But the world's champion is supposed to carry the company. And I can't think of a better person to be world's champion right now than Nick Aldis, not only because he has all the credibility as a world's champion in ring. I mean, he's one of 3 or 4 men to ever submit Sting. He's beaten everybody who's anybody, from Bobby Roode to AJ Styles to Kurt Angle to to Cody Rhodes to Marty Scurll. That's something that bugs me. People get on social media, who's Nick Aldis beating? I'm like, he's beaten everybody he's had to, and then some. He's beaten everybody. What are you talking about? He was a world champion in TNA and in Impact. I mean, this is a credible main eventer right here. Not only does he have that in-ring ability and those intangibles, that gravitas and that ability to work the mic, he carries the belt with such respect. He engages people with a high deal of respect. And whether we can debate whether he's a heel or not, I happen to believe that the NWA doesn't really do heels so much. But the biggest thing to me right now, given the time that we live in, is that Nick Aldis is a statesman. He issued a very touching, moving statement right at the beginning of the quarantine crisis. And it was like, all I could think of is like when Queen Elizabeth issued her statement. I felt like he was holding elected office. He assumed the mantle of leadership of the company. At that moment, the organization was on his shoulders, and he was speaking for everybody, whether it was somebody he was feuding with or not. I mean, he spoke for the voice of the whole company, and it's that dignity and that esteem. And it's he was on a podcast. You guys might have joined. It was on Twitch a few weeks ago. It was at the Wells Comic-Con or something like that. And I tuned in on it just because I wanted to see him interact with DDP and Eric Bischoff. But the podcast guy who was moderating says, Nick, he's like, when you carry yourself with such dignity that I feel like whenever you talk, it's the most important thing in the world. And at that moment, like, DDP is shaking his head in agreement, and I fully concur. It's like Nick Aldis is, and I know people know me to be a Nick Aldis mark, and I am, but it's not because of anything special about him. Like, I'm not in love with the guy. I just feel like he has assumed this role for our company that I love so much in a masterful way. It's in a way that's not been done since like Adam Pearce or Ric Flair or Harley Race. I mean, he is in that vein, and it came up last night in our live podcast where I made the argument that, look, it is time to start considering Nick Aldis as not a great champion, but one of the greatest of all times. Not only is he at that age, he's about at that age where Flair was, when Flair was starting to be regarded as, hey, this is a a champion of historic importance. I think in 86, 87, Flair was going on 36 or 37 years old. Nick Aldis is now 33 in his second title reign. He's held the belt for a combination of 850 plus days. Only 9 people in the history of the world have ever held it longer in any promotion. So we're talking about really, really important stuff here. This isn't just me like being biased because he responded to a tweet or something like that. This is me seeing, hey, as a person who who is somewhat informed, this is unique. We're not going to see this very often in history. What we're living through right now is something that they'll be talking about on a podcast 100 years from now about, man, the reign of Nick Aldis. Let's debate that for a while. So that's what I feel like we're living in. And on June the 11th, Nick Aldis will reach 600 days as the real world's champion, and that is an amazing accomplishment. If he were to lose the title that day and never hold it again, it would still be one of the most important wrestling feats in our lifetime. And I'm talking about me, you, and Jeff. There are very few things that we've seen in our life this important. So I guess that's kind of my 2 cents on it.
That's awesome. Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And I agree with you. The matches that I've seen, I think the match with him and Marty Scurll from last year, honestly, when they replayed that, was one of the best matches I think I've seen. So he's, I definitely agree with you. And you're right. He has that personality. Listen, anybody can have a belt. And anybody can hold it for a while. People come and go, fans will kind of sometimes dictate that, I guess, to an extent. But it takes that special kind of person, and comparing him to Flair, some may think, well, that's a really big comparison, but they both have that aura, I guess you can say, about them. And champions have had that, the ones who stand out, the ones you will remember, like you were saying, for years and years and years to come down the road. I would definitely agree with you, Jeff. I'm sure you probably do as well.
Absolutely. I mean, what he's done, and I mean, you think about it through all the years, and Robert, you mentioned this, through all the years where the NWA was kind of, teetering, and they didn't have the prestige that they once had. And his title reign and what he's done has helped elevate the NWA back to prominence and where it is right now. So he absolutely belongs in the same conversation as a Ric Flair or, any of the greats, because, I mean, what he's done has just been absolutely impressive.
Right. And people, when they hear me say that, sometimes it's almost like I've committed sacrilege. Like, you're comparing him to Ric Flair. And I'm like, you remember there was a time when Ric Flair was young and it was in his second title reign, and people were already comparing him to the greats too. So there's a lot of parallel there. It's not a premature thing to say that Nick Aldis should be in that conversation. He is at the point that Ric Flair was during Ric Flair's second and third title reign. I would compare this reign to the reign between Kerry Von Erich and Dusty Rhodes. This reign, which for me is the reign that put Ric Flair on the map and solidified him as one of the true greats. That's what we're seeing right now with Nick. It's the same thing, and or at least it's analogous to the same thing. So no one should be offended. I'm not downing anybody else or disrespecting. I feel like I'm celebrating the tradition and honoring the names of Flair and Race and Gene Kiniski and Dory Funk Jr. and Pat O'Connor when we put Nick Aldis, because Nick Aldis has done exactly what you just said. He has taken a company on his shoulders, and certainly with the help of other great talent, and I think of guys like Allison Kay and Tim Storm and Thunder Rosa and those guys, but he has really shouldered that and elevated the company like no one has. And it is it's everybody respects the NWA. You may not agree that his title is a world's title or that he's, in the top 5 or whatever, but everybody respects what's going on right now. And that's an achievement.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. So before we let you go, I don't want to take up a lot more of your time, but before we let you go here, where do you see, and we asked this to a lot of our guests about, respective promotions, especially, AEW, NWA, some of the ones that are kind of just, getting restarted and kicking in here. Where do you see NWA in, let's say 5 years from now? Where do you see it going? Do you see that TV deal coming? How far, what is the sky the limit for these guys? Where do you see this going in like 5 years time?
Yeah, if the sky's the limit for any promotion, it's the NWA. Again, I don't anticipate a TV deal in the immediate future just because it doesn't quite jibe with the mission of the NWA, although it wouldn't surprise me. But I see things like national tours, the NWA going on tour. It's not just being an NWA power thing. I see, more pay-per-views at venues scattered across the country, not just in the Southeast. So, so that the whole nation can go and see the NWA in person. But I see power remaining that base, and I see like viewership going up to 1 million, 2 million subscribers. And but again, the sky's the limit. It's hard. Who would have known that? 3 months ago, who would have guessed that we'd all be locked down right now and nobody be doing anything but empty arena shows? So it's hard to kind of judge. I don't really have a point of reference anymore. but if there is a company for whom the sky is the limit, it is this one. The NWA was built to pivot. It was built to endure a situation as strange as this, where I think other companies are struggling to kind of find their direction and how they're going to proceed. The NWA is settling in because we're sitting on, creativity and content and footage that's not made it beyond the cutting room floor, and that's and this and that. And you've got two great leaders, William Patrick Corgan and David Lagana at the helm, along with great creative advisors like Tim Storm and Joe Cephas and Nick Aldis and Allison Kay and others. So the future, I think, is very, very bright. I don't have any pessimism at all. And I'm excited, just as excited as you guys are. And honestly, the direction we're going is probably something that none of us can anticipate, just like everything else has been.
Yeah. No, that's true. That's true. And I think we've talked about this before as well. It's fun to be along for a ride. How many times in your life will you get a chance to kind of get on board with something like this when it's kind of just starting out again and go along for the ride with it? It just doesn't happen. I mean, the other companies' promotions have been around for years and years and years. So, being a fan and seeing this and jumping on, obviously, I know a lot of our listeners have started watching as well, along with Days. So it's just, it's great fun to see. And I can't wait until we get back to somewhat normalcy out there and until we get to start seeing things go back to normal a little bit again and see where they take us. But yeah, no, absolutely. I 100% agree. Well, listen, before we let you go, sir, shout out where people can find you on social media, or I know your daughter also has that YouTube show as well. So let us know and let them know where we can find you and where we can take a look at that stuff.
Okay. You can find me personally on Twitter at rstinson4. That's the number 4 as in 4 horsemen. I am a contributing member of This Is the NWA podcast. So we're on Twitter there. Also, I do a lot of collaboration with my man, Gary Horn. This is Gary Horn and Hey, It's Will Daily. I think you find him at Hey, It's Will. Also, I do, I'm a close friend of Adam Rotella and Elder Sauer. We talk quite a bit. So I want to put those guys over. And J Cal out of the Alliance blog, we interact with him quite a bit as well. And again, my hat's off to everybody in the NWA fam. And I include Wrestling Days and Insiders in that group. You guys are critical. You guys when you have had the opportunity to put us over, you've done so. We appreciate that. And I appreciate the opportunity to be on your show, man.
Oh, absolutely, man. Oh, we loved having you. Always love having somebody come and chat with us from that NWA fam, like you said. It was great to have you. Really appreciate you joining us tonight, and we look forward to everything that's coming. And with them, with the Nick Aldis thing, and yeah, absolutely looking forward to what's coming down the road. So, thank you so much for joining us, sir. And we will, talk to you somewhere down the road.
Sure, we most definitely will, my friend.
All right, sir. Thanks, man.
Take care.
You too.